You worthless child. Even the vultures would reject your flesh. The cruel words echoed across the bustling marketplace of Iloba as Adunni crashed to the ground, her calabash of palm oil shattering into countless pieces. The golden liquid spread across the red earth like spilled tears, mixing with the dust and creating muddy streams that seemed to mirror the shame flowing through her heart. Her stepmother, Aloja Kemi, stood over her with eyes blazing like burning coals. The woman's expensive Adaya cloth rustled as she raised her hand again, preparing for another blow. Around them, the market women paused their haggling to witness the spectacle, their faces a mixture of pity and uncomfortable silence. "Mama, please," Adunni whispered, scrambling to gather the broken pieces of calabash, her palms now bleeding from the sharp edges. "It was an accident." The ground was uneven. "Accident." Kemi's voice rose to a shriek that silenced even the chattering of the market monkeys. "This is the third calabash you've broken this month. Do you think palm oil grows on trees in my backyard? Do you think money falls from the sky like raindrops?" Adunni knew better than to point out that palm oil literally did come from trees. She had learned long ago that logic had no place in conversations with her stepmother. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching her tears fall onto the spreading oil. The marketplace of Iloba was usually a symphony of colors and sounds, traders calling out their wares, children chasing chickens between the stalls, the rhythmic pounding of mortars and pesos preparing yam flour. But now, an uncomfortable hush had settled over the immediate area as people pretended not to watch the familiar drama unfolding. Adunni was 17, with skin dark as polished ebony and eyes that held depths of wisdom far beyond her years. Those who remembered her mother often whispered that she had inherited Folike's beauty, but Kemi made sure such compliments never reached the girl's ears. Today, like most days, Adunni wore a faded wrapper that had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt of sorrows. "Look at you," Kemi continued, her voice dripping with disgust. "Your own father's blood runs in your veins, yet you bring nothing but misfortune to this house. Perhaps the gods cursed you when they took your mother. Perhaps they knew what a burden you would become." The words struck Adunni like physical blows. She had been only 7 when fever claimed her mother, Folake, the second wife of Chief Adegboy. Within months, her father had married Kemi, who came with 2 daughters of her own. And within a year of that marriage, Chief Adegboy himself had joined the ancestors, leaving Adunni at the mercy of a woman who saw her as nothing more than an unwanted reminder of her husband's previous love. "Mama Kemi," interrupted a gentle voice. Old Mama Ewit Grivenji, the herbs woman, stepped forward with her walking stick. "The child meant no harm. See how her hands bleed. Surely the gods have punished her enough for one small mistake." Kemi whirled on the old woman, her headgear shifting dangerously. "Mind your own business, old woman. This child has eaten my food, worn my clothes, and lived under my roof for 10 years, yet she shows no gratitude. Perhaps some suffering will teach her the value of what she has. What I have." The words escaped Adunni's lips before she could stop them. For the first time, she raised her head to meet her stepmother's gaze. "What do I have, Mama?" "The sleeping mat in the cooking hut. The wrapper with more holes than cloth. The privilege of fetching water before dawn and grinding pepper until my arms ache." A collective gasp arose from the watching crowd. No one spoke to Aloje Kemi this way, especially not a mere orphan girl. Kemi's face transformed into a mask of fury. "How dare you? How dare you speak to me with such insolence?" She turned to address the growing crowd. "You see. You all see what I deal with. This ungrateful child who bites the hand that feeds her." Ewit Gravedi and Busala, Kemi's daughters, emerged from behind a fabric store where they had been watching. At 19 and 18 respectively, both were considered beautiful by village standards, with their mother's fair complexion and curves that attracted suitors like honey draws flies. They wore matching ankara prints and gold jewelry that caught the afternoon sun. "Mother," Ewit Gravedi said with false concern, "perhaps we should take Adunni home." People are staring. No, Kemi declared, her voice carrying across the marketplace. Let them stare. Let everyone see what becomes of children who forget their place. She grabbed Adunni's arm and dragged her toward the center of the market square, where the talking drum usually called people to important announcements. People of Iluoba. Kemi called out, her voice strained from years of leading the Market Women's Association. Gather and witness. This girl, this ungrateful orphan, has shown me disrespect. Has beaten the hand that has fed and clothed her for 10 years. More people began to gather, drawn by the spectacle. Among them, Adunni spotted some of her mother's old friends, their faces filled with sympathy but their voices silent. In their traditional society, interfering with a mother's discipline of her child, even a stepchild, was considered deeply inappropriate. Strip her, someone called out from the crowd, though Adunni couldn't see who. Let her learn shame. No, said Kemi with a cruel smile. Shame is too gentle for such ingratitude. Adunni, since you question what you have, let me show you what you truly deserve. Remove your wrapper. The words hit like lightning. Public undressing was reserved for the most serious social transgressions, adultery, theft, or profound disrespect to elders. For an unmarried girl, it was social death. Mama, please, Adunni begged, falling to her knees. I'm sorry. I spoke without thinking. Please don't do this to me. You should have thought of that before you opened your mouth, Kemi replied coldly. Remove it, or I will have these women remove it for you. Adunni looked around desperately at the faces surrounding her. Some showed pity, others curiosity, a few displayed the cruel satisfaction that comes from witnessing someone else's downfall. But no one stepped forward to help. With shaking hands, she began to unwrap her faded cloth. The crowd pressed closer, eager for the spectacle. Just as the wrapper was about to fall, a commanding voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. Enough. Everyone turned to see a tall figure striding through the crowd. It was Bor Afikeod, the chief priest of Ifo, his white robes flowing behind him like clouds. His presence immediately commanded respect, and even Kemi took a step back. What is the meaning of this gathering? He demanded, his voice carrying the authority of both earthly wisdom and divine connection. Kemi quickly composed herself, forcing a respectful bow. Bor, this girl has shown me grave disrespect. I was merely correcting her behavior according to our customs. The old priest's eyes, sharp despite his age, took in the scene, the shattered calabash, the spilled oil, Adunni clutching her wrapper with bleeding hands, and the crowd of eager spectators. Our customs, he said slowly, speak of justice, not cruelty. They speak of correction, not humiliation. His gaze fixed on Kemi. Tell me, daughter of whom do you seek to shame in this marketplace? She was Chief Adegboye's daughter, Kemi admitted reluctantly. Oh, the priest nodded. And Chief Adegboye was not known for his wisdom and generosity. Did he not contribute greatly to our festivals and ceremonies? Did he not ensure that the orphans of our community were fed during the hungry season? The crowd murmured agreement. Chief Adegboye had been respected by all, known for his fairness and compassion. Then tell me, Afikeod continued, his voice growing stern, what would the spirit of such a man think of his daughter being stripped naked in the marketplace for the crime of, what was it? Speaking when spoken to. Kemi's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around them, the crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Several people started to drift away, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. The priest stepped closer to Adunni, his expression softening. Child, cover yourself properly and stand. As Adunni obeyed, still trembling, Afikeod addressed the dispersing crowd. The gods watch all things, including how we treat the most vulnerable among us. Remember this when you lay your heads down tonight. He turned back to Kemi, who now looked considerably less confident. As for you, Ayoloja, Perhaps you should remember that the same earth that receives the palm oil will one day receive us all. Treat others as you would wish your own daughters to be treated if misfortune should ever visit your house. With that, he placed a protective hand on Adunni's shoulder and began to lead her away from the marketplace. But as they walked, Kemi's voice followed them, low and venomous. This is not finished, Adunni. Mark my words, this is far from finished. As they reached the edge of the market, Ifikeo stopped and turned to look at the girl beside him. In her eyes, he saw something that made him pause, not just pain and humiliation, but a fire that refused to be extinguished. It was the same fire he had seen in her mother's eyes years ago, the same strength that had helped Folek survive her own trials. Child, he said quietly, the gods work in mysterious ways. Sometimes our greatest suffering becomes the foundation of our greatest triumph. Remember that in the dark days ahead. Adunni nodded, not fully understanding his words but sensing their importance. As she walked home to face whatever new cruelties awaited her, she could not know that this day of shame would indeed mark the beginning of a journey that would take her from the dust of the marketplace to the golden throne of a kingdom. But she could feel it, the stirring in her heart like the first breath of wind that signals a coming storm. What would you do if life treated you unfairly like this? Hit like if you believe in destiny, and comment where you're watching from. The marketplace had returned to its normal rhythm, but the echoes of what had transpired would ripple through the community in ways no one could imagine. And in the growing shadows of evening, Adunni walked toward her uncertain future, unaware that the eyes of destiny were already upon her. The wooden pestle slipped from Adunni's exhausted hands for the third time that evening, clattering against the mortar with a sound that seemed to announce her failure to the entire compound. Her palms, still tender from the previous day's cuts, had begun bleeding again, drops of red mixing with the groundnut paste she was supposed to be preparing for the family's evening meal. Useless girl. Kemi's voice rang out from the main house, where she sat with her daughters, braiding each other's hair by lamplight. How long does it take to grind groundnuts? My grandmother could do it faster with her eyes closed. Adunni wiped her bleeding hands on the old cloth tied around her waist and hefted the pestle again. The compound was quiet except for the distant sound of drums from the palace, where some celebration was taking place. Through the gaps in the wooden fence, she could see other families gathered around their own cooking fires, sharing stories and laughter as they prepared their evening meals. Here, in her stepmother's compound, laughter was as rare as rainfall in the dry season. Sister Adunni, came a whisper from the shadows near the cooking hut. Adunni looked up to see Kolo, the young son of their neighbor, peering through a hole in the fence. At 12 years old, he was one of the few people who still showed her kindness. Kolo, you shouldn't be here, she whispered back, continuing to pound the groundnuts. If Mama Kemi sees you. I brought you something, he interrupted, pushing a small wrapped bundle through the fence opening. Mama sent extra akara from our evening meal. She said you looked in at the market yesterday. Adunni's heart swelled with gratitude. Mama Busy, Kolo's mother, had been one of her own mother's closest friends. Though she couldn't openly interfere with Kemi's household, she found small ways to show kindness. Tell your mother I said thank you, Adunni whispered, quickly hiding the bundle in her wrapper. May the gods bless her generous heart. Mama also said. Kolo hesitated, glancing around nervously. She said she heard Aoloje Kemi talking to some men today. About finding you a husband. Adunni's pestle froze midway to the mortar. What kind of men? I don't know. But Mama's face looked worried when she told me. She said to tell you to be careful. Before Adunni could respond, the sound of footsteps approaching made Kolo disappear into the darkness like a shadow. Ewit Gravedi appeared around the corner of the cooking hut, her beautiful face twisted with its usual expression of disdain. Who are you talking to? She demanded, scanning the area with suspicious eyes. No one, Adunni replied, resuming her pounding with renewed vigor. I was singing to help pass the time. Singing. Ewit Gravedi laughed mockingly. What could you possibly have to sing about? Your wonderful life. Your bright future. Adunni kept her eyes fixed on her work, knowing that any response would only invite more cruelty. But Ewitgravedi was in a talkative mood, settling herself on a wooden stool as if preparing for a long conversation. You know, she said, examining her fingernails in the lamplight, Mother has been very patient with you. More patient than most women would be with such a burden. The word hung in the air like smoke from wet wood. Adunni had heard it so often that it had become almost like her second name. Burden. The unwanted weight that slowed down the family, consumed their resources, and gave nothing back. But Mother's patience is not infinite, Ewitgravedi continued. She's been thinking about your future. About what will happen to you when she grows too old to care for such a dependent. Adunni's hands began to tremble as she walked. She had always known this day would come, the day when Kemi would tire of feeding and housing her. But she had hoped for more time, perhaps to save enough cowrie shells to rent a small space in the market, to support herself through trading or craft. There's good news though, Ewitgravedi's voice took on a false sweetness that made Adunni's skin crawl. Mother has found someone willing to take you off her hands. Someone willing to marry you. The peso slipped again, this time landing on Adunni's foot. She beat back a cry of pain, but couldn't hide her sharp intake of breath. Aren't you curious about your future husband? Ewitgravedi pressed. His name is Akinwand. He's a palm wine tapper from the next village. A widower. Adunni's heart sank further. Palm wine tappers were among the lowest in social status, barely above beggars. And widowers, especially older ones, usually sought very young wives to work their farms and bear children to replace those lost to disease or misfortune. His, experienced, Ewitgravedi continued with barely concealed glee. 3 wives have died in his care already. Mother says he's learned from those losses and will know better how to handle a 4th wife. 3 dead wives. The words echoed in Adunni's mind like a death song. In their community, 1 dead wife could be attributed to bad luck or the God's will. 2 might be seen as unfortunate but not unusual. But 3 suggested something much darker. When? Adunni's voice was barely a whisper. Soon. Very soon. He's already paid the bride price, though Mother had to ask for much less than she would have for me or Busela. After all, what man would pay full price for damaged goods? The casual cruelty of the statement hit Adunni like a physical blow. She was 17, still young by village standards, with no physical deformities or obvious flaws. Her only crime was being orphaned and dependent on a woman who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience. Of course, Ewitgravedi stood and brushed dust from her wrapper. If you were to disappear before the marriage arrangements are finalized, Mother would have to return the bride price. And you know how Mother feels about losing money. The threat was clear. There would be no escape, no running away to another village or seeking sanctuary with distant relatives. Kemi had made sure of that by isolating Adunni from any family connections that might offer refuge. As Ewitgravedi walked away, her laughter floating back on the night air, Adunni finally allowed herself to stop pounding. Her hands were shaking too badly to continue, and her vision was blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She looked up at the star-filled sky, searching for some sign from the ancestors, some indication that her mother was watching over her. But the stars remained silent, offering no comfort, no solutions. A soft rustling sound made her turn toward the fence. Kola had returned, his young face grave with concern. Sister Adunni, I heard some of what that wicked girl said. Is it true? About the marriage. Adunni nodded, unable to trust her voice. Mama says Akinwand beat his last wife so badly the neighbors could hear her screams 3 compounds away. And the one before that, they say she jumped into the river rather than face another beating. Now Adunni understood why Mama Busy had looked worried. This wasn't just an unwanted marriage, it was likely a death sentence. But Mama also said something else, Kola continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. She said your mother once told her about a relative, your father's sister, who lives in the great city of Oyo. Someone who might help if you could find her. Oyo. Adunni's heart leaped. Oyo was the seat of the great Oyo Empire, home to the Orphan and his magnificent court. But it was also 3 days' journey on foot, through forests where bandits roamed and wild animals hunted. Her name is Wai with a cute LR with Grieve Adunni. Yes, you were named after her. She serves in the palace of the Orphan. Mama doesn't know if she's still alive, but it was hope. The first real hope Adunni had felt in years. Thank you, Kola, she whispered fiercely. Tell your mother, tell her she has given me the greatest gift anyone could give. As the boy disappeared again into the darkness, Adunni resumed her pounding with new energy. Her mind was racing now, planning. She would need food for the journey, water, and some way to find her aunt in the vast city of Oyo. She would need to leave before Akinwon came to collect his bride. Most importantly, she would need courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Behind her, lamplight still flickered in the main house where Kemi and her daughters continued their evening routine, unaware that their carefully laid plans were about to be disrupted. They had underestimated their victim, assuming that years of cruelty had broken her spirit completely. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As Adunni finally finished grinding the groundnuts and began preparing the evening stew, she found herself humming softly, the same lullaby her mother used to sing when she was small. It spoke of rivers that always found their way to the ocean, no matter what obstacles stood in their path. Tonight, for the first time in years, Adunni felt like that river, ready to carve a new course through whatever stood between her and freedom. The cruel laughter from the main house no longer had the power to wound her. She was already gone in spirit, already planning her escape into an uncertain but hopeful future. The stars that had seemed cold and distant before now looked like navigation points, guiding lights that would lead her toward her destiny. Somewhere in the great city of Oyo, a woman who shared her name might be waiting, a woman who could offer the family connection and protection she had been denied for so long. As she served the evening meal to her stepmother and stepsisters, Adunni kept her face carefully blank, giving no sign of the revolution taking place in her heart. Let them think they had won. Let them believe she was resigned to her fate. Tomorrow night, when they expected to find her sleeping in the cooking hut, they would discover only empty sleeping mats and the echo of dreams that refused to be crushed. The drums from the palace continued their distant rhythm, and to Adunni's ears, they sounded like a celebration of her coming freedom. The compound was finally quiet when Adunni began her desperate preparations. 3 days had passed since Ewit Gravedeer's cruel announcement, and each day had brought news that Akinwonder's arrival was imminent. This morning, Kemi had sent her to the market with specific instructions to buy ingredients for a wedding feast, her own wedding feast. Tonight was her only chance. Moving like a shadow in the darkness, Adunni gathered her meager possessions, her mother's coral beads, hidden for years beneath her sleeping mat, a small knife for protection, the little money she had managed to save from market errands, and the akara that kind Mama Busy had given her. She wrapped everything in her second wrapper, the one with fewer holes, and tied the bundle securely around her waist beneath her clothing. Her heart hammered against her chest as she made her way toward the compound gate. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves seemed loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. Just as she lifted the wooden latch, a voice froze her blood. Going somewhere, daughter? Adunni spun around to find Kemi standing in the doorway of the main house, her silhouette backlit by the dying embers of the cooking fire. How long had she been watching? I was just checking the gate, Mama, Adunni stammered. I heard a sound and wanted to make sure it was properly secured. Kemi stepped into the moonlight, and Adunni could see the cruel smile playing at the corners of her mouth. How thoughtful of you. So concerned with security on the very night before your wedding preparations begin. The words confirmed Adunni's worst fears. Somehow, Kemi had suspected her intentions. Come, Kemi commanded, her voice deceptively gentle. Let's have a conversation. Woman to woman. Adunni had no choice but to follow her stepmother to the center of the compound, where two wooden stools sat beneath the ancient Iroko tree. The same tree where her mother used to sit and braid her hair, telling stories of brave women who overcame impossible odds. Sit, Kemi commanded, and Adunni obeyed, her mind racing for some explanation that might save her. You know, Kemi began conversationally, settling herself on the other stool, your mother was also rebellious when she was young. Always thinking she could choose her own path, make her own decisions. It took considerable guidance to help her understand her place in the world. This was the first time Kemi had ever mentioned Folktale directly, and Adunni found herself leaning forward despite her fear. Oh yes, Kemi continued, noting her reaction. We knew each other well, your mother and I. Before your father chose her as his second wife, he had been courting me. I was the one he visited first, the one he brought kola nuts and palm wine. But then your mother arrived at the market one day, and suddenly nothing else mattered to him. The bitter jealousy in Kemi's voice was like poison in the night air. After all these years, she was finally revealing the true source of her cruelty. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Beautiful and proud and certain that the world owed her something special. Just like you. Kemi's eyes glittered in the moonlight. But beauty fades, daughter. Pride can be broken. And the world owes us nothing except what we can take for ourselves. Why are you telling me this? Adunni whispered. Because I want you to understand that running away won't change your nature. You are your mother's daughter, stubborn, foolish, and destined for suffering. Better to accept the husband I found for you than to chase impossible dreams. Kemi reached into her wrapper and pulled out a small leather pouch. Do you know what this is? Adunni shook her head, though something about the pouch made her skin crawl. Medicine, Kemi said simply. Very strong medicine, prepared by the best herbalist in 3 villages. Medicine to ensure that a new bride is compliant on her wedding night and beyond. The implications hit Adunni like a physical blow. Not content with arranging a marriage to a violent man, Kemi intended to drug her into submission. One small portion mixed with your evening meal each day, Kemi continued, and you'll find that resistance becomes impossible. Fighting back becomes unthinkable. It's really quite merciful, you'll hardly feel the pain of your new life. Rage built in Adunni's chest like fire in dry grass. This woman hadn't just stolen her childhood and destroyed her chances at happiness, she intended to steal her very will, her ability to think and choose and resist. You're a monster, Adunni breathed. Kemi laughed, the sound like breaking glass. I'm a realist. Your mother thought she could defy the natural order, thought her beauty and charm would protect her forever. Look where it got her, dead before 30, leaving behind a daughter who inherited her foolish dreams but none of her advantages. My mother was worth 10 of you. The words exploded from Adunni before she could stop them. She was on her feet now, her hands clenched into fists, 10 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. Kemi rose as well, her face transforming into something ugly and terrible. Your mother was a witch who stole my rightful place and died cursed by the gods. And you, she raised her hand to strike. But Adunni was done being struck. Done being humiliated. Done being treated like something less than human. She caught Kemi's wrist mid-swing, her grip strengthened by years of grinding grain and hauling water. For a moment, the two women stood locked in combat, stepmother and stepdaughter, abuser and victim. Let go of me. Kemi hissed. No, Adunni said quietly. I'm done letting go. Done accepting. Done bowing my head while you destroy what's left of my life. She pushed Kemi backward, not violently but firmly, causing the older woman to stumble and fall onto her stool. The leather pouch flew from her hand, scattering its contents across the dirt. You want to know what I think? Adunni continued, her voice growing stronger. I think you're the one who's cursed. Cursed to see my mother's face every time you look at me. Cursed to remember that no matter how much power you have over me now, she was the one my father chose to love. Kemi's face had gone pale in the moonlight, but her eyes burned with murderous fury. You ungrateful. I'm leaving, Adunni announced calmly. Tonight. Right now. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. The marriage has been arranged. The bride price paid. Akinwon will come looking for you, and when he does, then tell him his bride ran into the forest and was eaten by leopards. Tell him she threw herself in the river like his last wife. Tell him whatever you want. Adunni turned toward the gate. But I will not be here. You have nowhere to go. Kemi shrieked, abandoning any pretense of quiet. No family will take you. No man will marry damaged goods who ran from their first arrangement. You'll starve in the streets like a common beggar. Then I'll starve free, Adunni replied. Better to die as myself than live as your victim. She reached the gate and lifted the latch, her hand steady now despite the magnitude of what she was doing. Behind her, she heard Kemi scrambling to her feet, probably reaching for something to throw or strike with. With gravity. Busela. Kemi began shouting for her daughters. Come quickly. The ungrateful wretch is trying to run. But Adunni was already through the gate and running down the dirt path that led toward the forest. Behind her, she could hear voices, Kemi's daughters emerging from the house, confused and sleepy. Soon they would realize what was happening and might try to follow her. But she had a head start, and more importantly, she had desperation driving her forward. The forest path was treacherous in the darkness, roots and rocks waiting to trip unwary travelers. But Adunni had walked this path countless times gathering firewood and medicinal herbs. She knew every twist and turn, every safe place to step. As she ran deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit faded behind her. Either they had given up quickly, or Kemi was being more strategic, perhaps planning to send men after her at dawn when tracking would be easier. It didn't matter. She would be long gone by dawn, following the ancient trade routes toward Oyo. She would find her aunt, or die trying. After an hour of steady travel, she finally allowed herself to stop and rest beside a small stream. The water was cool and sweet, washing away the dust and sweat of her escape. As she drank, she found herself thinking about her mother. I kept your beads safe, Mama, she whispered to the night air. And I'm going to find family, real family, who will remember you with love instead of jealousy. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves above her, and for a moment, Adunni could swear she felt her mother's presence, approving of her daughter's courage. The hardest part of her journey was still ahead, 3 days through dangerous territory with little food or protection. But she had taken the first step, broken free from the compound that had been her prison for 10 years. As she prepared to resume walking, Adunni looked back one last time in the direction she had come. Somewhere in that darkness, Kemi was probably raging about ungrateful orphans and lost bride prices. Let her rage. Let her explain to Akinwon why his fourth wife had vanished like smoke. The forest stretched ahead, dark and full of unknown dangers. But it also led to Oyo, to possibilities she had never dared imagine, to a future she would write with her own hands. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this tale of courage. What do you think will happen when Adunni reaches the great city? Comment below and tell us, would you have been brave enough to run into the unknown like this? For now, she was free. And freedom, she discovered, was worth every risk. 3 days of walking through forests, across rivers, and along dusty trade routes had left Adunni exhausted, hungry, and nearly hopeless. Her feet were blistered and bleeding, her water gourd was empty, and the few cowrie shells she had saved were long spent on small portions of food from sympathetic traders. But nothing, not the physical pain, not the gnawing hunger, not even the constant fear of wild animals or bandits, had prepared her for the overwhelming sight of Oyo. The great city rose from the savannah like a vision from the gods themselves. Massive mud brick walls stretched further than she could see, topped with wooden palisades where guards kept watch over the surrounding countryside. The main gate was a marvel of engineering, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell the story of the empire itself. Most magnificent of all was the palace complex visible in the distance, multiple buildings with soaring roofs that caught the morning light like golden crowns. Adunni had never seen so many people in one place. Traders with loaded donkeys, craftsmen carrying tools and goods, women balancing massive loads on their heads, children running between the legs of adults, all flowing in and out of the city gates like water through a broken dam. The noise was overwhelming, dozens of languages she didn't recognize, the braying of animals, the calls of traders advertising their wares, the rhythmic pounding of craftsmen at work. And the smells. Roasting meat, exotic spices, leather, incense, and the indefinable scent of thousands of people living closely together. For a moment, Adunni stood paralyzed at the gate, clutching her bundle and trying to comprehend the enormity of her task. How would she find one woman in this vast sea of humanity? How would she even begin to search for why with a cruelty with grieve Adunni in a city that seemed to stretch to the horizon? Move along, country girl, barked the guard at the gate, gesturing impatiently. This isn't a viewing ground for gawking villagers. Adunni hurried through the gate, immediately swept up in the river of humanity flowing down the main street. She had never felt so small, so lost, so utterly alone. The confident determination that had carried her through 3 days of dangerous travel began to crumble under the weight of the city's indifference. She tried asking passers-by about her aunt, but most people barely slowed down to listen to her questions, and those who did either shook their heads or looked at her with suspicion. A dusty, travel-worn village girl asking about someone in the royal palace. It sounded like the beginning of a con game or worse. By midday, Adunni found herself in the great market square, even more massive than the one in her home village. Here, she thought, surely someone would know about the palace staff. But her inquiries met with the same indifference, and worse, she began to notice that her rural accent and simple clothing marked her immediately as an outsider. Looking for someone in the palace, are you? Came a voice behind her. Adunni turned to see a woman about her stepmother's age, but where Kemi's face held perpetual cruelty, this woman's expression seemed merely calculating. She wore fine cloth and gold jewelry that marked her as prosperous, though something about her smile made Adunni uneasy. Yes, Ma, Adunni replied politely. My aunt, why with a cruelty with grieve Adunni? She serves in the palace of the Orphan. Or, seeking family connections in high places, the woman nodded knowingly. Very wise for a young girl alone in the big city. My name is Ayag Baronk, and I know everyone worth knowing in this city. Hope flared in Adunni's chest. You know my aunt? I know of her, Ronk replied carefully. She is indeed a powerful woman in the palace spiritual circles. But reaching her, that requires certain protocols. Certain arrangements. The way she emphasized the word arrangements made Adunni's skin prickle with warning, but desperation overrode caution. What kind of arrangements? Well, Ronk looked around conspiratorially. You can't simply walk up to the palace gates asking for an audience with palace priestesses. There are procedures, payments to be made to various officials, proper introductions to be secured. Payments. Adunni's heart sank. I have very little money left. Money isn't the only currency in Oyo, Ronk said with that unsettling smile. A young, pretty girl like you has other assets. I run an establishment where such assets can be very valuable. Work for me for a few months, and I guarantee you have enough influence and connections to reach your precious aunt. Now Adunni understood the true nature of this opportunity. Ronk was a madam, offering to sell her into prostitution in exchange for vague promises of help she might never provide. Thank you, Adunni said carefully, but I think I'll try other approaches first. Ronke's friendly mask slipped slightly. Other approaches. Child, You've been wandering this market for hours asking foolish questions. No one will help you. No one cares about another displaced village girl. At least with me, you'd have food, shelter, and eventually the connections you need. I said no, thank you. Now the mask fell away completely, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. You'll be back, Ronk said flatly. When you've spent a few nights sleeping in alleys, when hunger gnaws at your belly, when you realize that pride doesn't fill an empty stomach, you'll come looking for me. And my terms will be much less generous then. Adunni turned and walked away as quickly as she could without actually running. Behind her, she heard Ronk's laughter following her through the market crowd. The encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. What if the woman was right? What if she was foolish to think she could navigate this huge, indifferent city on her own? As the sun began to set, Adunni found herself in a quieter section of the city, where residential compounds gave way to religious shrines and temples. Her feet had led her here instinctively, seeking the comfort of familiar spiritual spaces. She paused before a shrine to On, the river goddess, where a few people were leaving offerings of honey and perfume. Without thinking, she found herself kneeling before the shrine, pouring out her heart in whispered prayer. Great Mother On, protector of women and children, I am lost and afraid. I seek family, I seek belonging, I seek the strength to continue. If it is your will, please guide my steps to my Aunt Adunni, or show me what I must do to survive in this place. She had no honey or perfume to offer, only her mother's coral beads. With trembling fingers, she untied one small bead from the string and placed it before the shrine. This belonged to my mother, she whispered. She was a good woman who died too soon. Please, let this offering carry the weight of all the love she gave me. As she knelt there, tears finally coming after 3 days of forced strength, she became aware of a presence behind her. An elderly woman in white robes was watching her with interest. That was a beautiful prayer, child, the woman said softly. And a precious offering. On values sincerity above riches. Adunni wiped her eyes and turned. The woman was perhaps 60 years old, with intricate scarification marking her as a person of spiritual authority. Her robes were simple but perfectly clean, and her head wrap was tied in the style worn by palace priestesses. You're not from Oyo, the woman observed gently. No, Ma. I come from Iluoba, seeking my father's sister. She serves in the palace. Her name is Yoruba-inspired Adunni. The elderly woman's eyebrows rose in surprise. Adunni. The keeper of the sacred cowries. The one who reads the future for the Alefin himself. You know her. Adunni's heart leaped. Know her. Child, I am she. The world seemed to tilt around Adunni. After 3 days of desperate searching, her aunt had found her, or perhaps On had guided them to each other. You are why with a cute with Grieve Adunni, she stammered. I am. And you, child, have your father's eyes and your mother's stubborn chin. You must be little Adunni, though you're not so little anymore. You remember me? I remember the day you were born, Adunni said, tears glistening in her own eyes. I remember holding you when you were barely an hour old, and your mother made me promise to watch over you if anything ever happened to her. She died when I was 7. And my father died the year after that. I know, child. I felt their spirits pass to the ancestors. I tried to find you, to honor my promise, but your stepmother had moved you to her family compound and refused all contact. The relief was so overwhelming that Adunni felt her legs give way. Her aunt caught her gently, supporting her as the weight of 3 days' terror and exhaustion finally caught up with her. Come, Adunni said softly. Come home, daughter of my heart. We have 10 years of lost time to recover, and much to discuss about why the gods have brought you to me now, in my hour of greatest need. As they walked through the darkening streets toward the palace complex, Adunni began to explain. The Alafin's eldest son, Prince Adegbenga, is to be married soon. The negotiations have been complex, involving alliances with 3 different kingdoms. I have been chosen to oversee the spiritual preparations, but I have been praying for assistance, someone trustworthy to help with the ritual preparations. You think the God sent me here to help you? Child, you have traveled 3 days through dangerous territory, arrived in a strange city with nothing but faith and your mother's beads, and found your way to the exact shrine where I come to pray every evening. If that isn't divine guidance, I don't know what is. They had reached the palace gates now, massive wooden doors carved with symbols of power and protection. The guards recognized Adunni immediately and bowed respectfully as she passed. But more than that, Adunni continued as they walked through courtyards that took Adunni's breath away. Tomorrow the palace receives delegations from the 3 kingdoms seeking alliance through this marriage. One of those kingdoms is ruled by a young Oba who has refused every bride his council has suggested. He claims he will know his true queen when he sees her, that the gods will guide him to the right choice. They had reached a beautiful compound within the palace complex, clearly Adunni's private residence. As her aunt lit oil lamps and prepared to welcome her properly, she continued her explanation. His name is Oba Ademela, and he rules the kingdom of In. His delegation arrives tomorrow, and there will be a great feast to honor all the visiting dignitaries. Adunni was trying to follow the implications, but exhaustion was making her mind sluggish. What does this mean for me, aunt? Adunni turned to face her, and in the lamplight, her expression was both loving and mysterious. It means, my dear child, that your suffering is about to end and your true destiny is about to begin. But first, you must rest. Tomorrow will bring changes neither of us can fully imagine. As Adunni finally allowed herself to feel safe for the first time in 10 years, she couldn't know that Oba Ademola had been traveling toward Oyo with a heavy heart, convinced that this political marriage would trap him in a loveless union. Nor could she know that his own prayers to the gods had been remarkably similar to hers, seeking guidance, seeking true love, seeking someone who would see past titles and riches to the man beneath the crown. The gods, it seemed, had been listening to both their prayers. The great hall of the Alephin's palace had been transformed into a vision of imperial splendor. Silk banners in royal blue and gold hung from the rafters, while hundreds of oil lamps cast dancing shadows on walls adorned with bronze plaques depicting the great deeds of previous rulers. The air was thick with the scent of burning sandalwood and the sounds of talking drums, flutes, and the gentle murmur of distinguished guests. Adunni stood in the shadows near the serving area, hardly recognizing herself in the beautiful indigo wrapper and matching headwrap her aunt had provided. For the first time in years, she wore gold jewelry, delicate earrings and bracelets that had belonged to her mother, returned to her by Adunni who had kept them safe all these years. Remember, her aunt whispered beside her, you are here as my assistant, but you are also the daughter of Chief Adegboy of Iloba. Hold your head high. Your bloodline is as noble as any in this room. The words felt strange after so many years of being called worthless, but Adunni tried to internalize them as she watched the pageantry unfolding before her. At the high table sat the Alephin himself, magnificent in white robes and a beaded crown that caught the lamplight like captured stars. To his right sat his son, Prince Adegbenga, a handsome man of about 25 whose bored expression suggested he was less than thrilled with the evening's proceedings. The 3 delegations seeking marriage alliances had each brought their finest representatives. From the mountain kingdom of Ibadan came warriors in leopard skins and chiefs wearing elaborate feathered caps. From the trading empire of Ebokuta came merchants in silk robes and women adorned with coral beads worth more than entire villages. But it was the 3rd delegation that drew Adunni's attention and held it. The representatives from In were different from the others. Where the other groups displayed their wealth and power through elaborate dress and ceremony, these visitors carried themselves with a quiet dignity that spoke of confidence rather than boastfulness. Their leader was a man perhaps 28 years old, tall and lean with skin like polished bronze and eyes that seemed to see everything without judgment. That is Oba Ademela, Adunni murmured, noting the direction of her gaze. They say he is as wise as he is handsome, as generous as he is strong. His kingdom may be smaller than the others, but his people love him with a devotion that makes him more powerful than rulers with twice his armies. Adunni found herself studying the young king more intently. There was something in his posture, a subtle tension that suggested he was as uncomfortable with these proceedings as Prince Adegbenga appeared to be. "Aunt," she whispered, "why does he look so unhappy? Surely a political marriage would benefit his kingdom." "Because," Adunni replied quietly, "he believes in love. In a world where most rulers marry for alliance and advantage, he has insisted that he will only marry a woman he can truly cherish. His advisors think him foolish, but I think him wise. A kingdom built on love is stronger than one built on mere convenience." The evening progressed with formal presentations from each delegation. Gifts were exchanged, speeches were made praising the wisdom of the Orphan and the strength of the proposed alliances. Through it all, Adunni helped her aunt with various ceremonial duties, ensuring the sacred objects were properly arranged, burning specific combinations of incense at prescribed times, maintaining the spiritual balance of the gathering. It was during one of these duties, as she moved quietly around the edges of the great hall carrying a brass censer, that disaster struck. One of the servants, hurrying past with a heavy tray of palm wine, bumped into her hard enough to knock her off balance. The censer went flying, hot coals scattering across the floor and landing dangerously close to the silk banners hanging along the walls. The hall erupted in chaos. Guests scrambled away from the spreading embers, servants rushed with water and sand to prevent a fire, and in the confusion, several of the scattered coals rolled directly toward where the Orphan sat. Without thinking, Adunni threw herself forward, using her own wrapper to smother the glowing coals before they could reach the royal table. The action saved the Orphan from potential burns, but left her wrapper singed and her hands blistered from the heat. "Foolish girl," shouted the head servant, rushing toward her with obvious intent to deliver a beating for her clumsiness. "Look what your carelessness has cost." But before he could reach her, a strong hand caught his wrist. "Stop." The voice carried absolute authority, and everyone in the hall froze. Oba Ademola had risen from his seat and crossed the room to stand protectively in front of Adunni. This woman prevented what could have been a catastrophe. She risked her own safety to protect the Orphan. She deserves gratitude, not punishment. The hall had fallen completely silent now, everyone watching this unexpected intervention by one of the visiting rulers. "Your Majesty is very kind," the head servant stammered, "but the girl's clumsiness caused the problem in the first place." "Did it?" Ademola's voice was quiet but carried clearly through the hall. "From where I sat, I saw a servant collide with her, not the other way around. I saw a young woman react with courage and quick thinking when others stood frozen with shock." He turned to face Adunni directly, and when their eyes met, something electric passed between them. Later, both would struggle to describe that moment, as if the gods themselves had suddenly illuminated the path their lives were meant to take. "Are you injured?" he asked gently. Adunni found her voice with difficulty. "Only minor burns, Your Majesty. Nothing that won't heal." "Let me see." It was unprecedented, a king examining the injuries of a servant girl, but no one dared protest as Ademola carefully looked at her singed hands. His touch was gentle, and Adunni felt her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the excitement of the accident. "These need proper treatment," he declared. "Someone bring palm oil and clean cloth." "Your Majesty," Adunni stepped forward, her voice carefully respectful but tinged with something that sounded almost like amusement. "Allow me to tend to my assistant. I have experience with healing burns." "Your assistant?" Ademola looked between the two women, clearly noting the family resemblance now that he was paying attention. "My niece, Your Majesty. The daughter of my late brother, Chief Adegboy of Iloba." A murmur ran through the hall. Chief Adegboy had been well known throughout the region for his wisdom and generosity. His daughter would be considered nobility in her own right, despite her current humble circumstances. Then she is not merely a servant, but a woman of noble blood who chose to risk herself for others," Ademola said, his eyes never leaving Adunni's face. "That makes her actions even more remarkable." The Orphan himself had been watching this exchange with growing interest. A ruler who had survived decades of palace intrigue, he recognized the signs of instant, mutual attraction when he saw them. "Perhaps," he said diplomatically, "we should allow the young lady to be properly tended, and then continue our evening's festivities. Though I must say, Oba Ademola, your quick action to protect my guest reflects well on the character of his ruler." As Adunni led Adunni away to treat her burns, whispers began racing through the hall. Had they really just witnessed a king defend a servant girl? Had there been some special significance to the way he looked at her? What did this mean for the evening's negotiations? In the small chamber where Adunni tended to her burns, Adunni felt as if she were floating in a dream. "Aunt," she whispered, "what just happened in there?" Adunni smiled as she gently applied palm oil to the singed skin. "What happened, my dear, is that a king looked past titles and circumstances to see the true nature of a woman's heart. And a young woman discovered that her greatest moment of apparent clumsiness was actually her destiny revealing itself. But he's a king, and I'm nobody. An orphan. A girl who ran away from an unwanted marriage just days ago. You are the daughter of Chief Adegboy, raised by Yoruba-inspired with grave Adunni, blessed by the gods with beauty, courage, and a heart that puts others before herself. That is somebody, my child. That is someone worthy of any man's love, king or commoner." Through the thin walls of the chamber, they could hear the sounds of the feast continuing, but the energy had changed. Conversations were more animated, and there seemed to be an undercurrent of excitement that hadn't been there before. "What do I do now?" Adunni asked. "Now, you return to the feast. You hold your head high and remember that you are exactly where the gods intended you to be. And if a certain young king seeks your company, you listen to what he has to say." When they returned to the great hall, Adunni noticed immediately that the seating arrangements had somehow shifted. A place had been made for her at one of the high tables, not as a servant, but as Adunni's honored niece. It was a subtle but significant elevation in status that didn't go unnoticed by the other guests. More significantly, throughout the rest of the evening, she found herself the focus of Oba Ademola's attention. He asked about her journey to Oyo, her family, her thoughts on poetry and music. He shared stories of his own kingdom, his hopes for his people, his dreams of building a land where justice and compassion were valued as highly as strength and wealth. Their conversation flowed as naturally as a river finding its course, and Adunni found herself forgetting that she was speaking to a king. He was simply Ademola, intelligent, kind, funny, and somehow looking at her as if she were the most fascinating woman he had ever encountered. As the evening drew to a close and the delegations prepared to retire to their guest quarters, Ademola approached Adunni with formal courtesy. "Why with a cute ally with grave? I wonder if I might request the honor of your niece's company tomorrow. I would very much like to show her the gardens of the palace and continue our conversation." Adunni bowed graciously. "Your Majesty honors our family. I'm certain Adunni would be delighted to accept your invitation." Later, as Adunni prepared for sleep in her aunt's comfortable compound, she could hardly believe the transformation of her life. 3 days ago, she had been a desperate runaway fleeing an unwanted marriage. Tonight, she had dined with royalty and captured the interest of a king. "Is it real, aunt?" she asked as Adunni helped her prepare for bed. "Or will I wake up tomorrow to find it was all a dream?" "It's as real as your mother's love, as real as your father's blood in your veins, as real as the courage that brought you here," Adunni replied. "But remember, child, tomorrow will bring choices. Important choices. The path to a throne is never simple, and there will be those who oppose any elevation of your status." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Prince Adegbenga was supposed to choose a bride from among the delegations. Instead, a visiting king has shown clear interest in a woman with no political connections to offer. The other kingdoms will not be pleased, and palace politics can be treacherous. Adunni nodded soberly, but she felt no fear. After surviving Kemi's cruelty and making the dangerous journey to Oyo, palace intrigue seemed manageable. Whatever comes tomorrow, she said quietly, I'm ready for it. Outside, the stars shone down on the great palace, and in another guest compound, Oba Ademola lay awake thinking about a pair of intelligent eyes and a voice that had spoken to his heart. For the first time since he had inherited his throne, he could imagine a future that included not just duty and responsibility, but love and partnership. The gods had indeed been listening to both their prayers, weaving their separate paths into a single destiny that would change not just their lives, but the fate of kingdoms. But that's a story for the marriage feast that would follow, a celebration that would see an orphan girl transformed into a beloved queen, proving once and for all that suffering endured with dignity and courage often becomes the foundation for the greatest triumphs. Don't forget to like this video if Adunni's story moved you, subscribe for more amazing African tales, and hit that notification bell. In the comments, tell us, do you believe in destiny bringing two people together? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their current circumstances don't define their future. The orphan girl's journey from suffering to crown was complete, but her story as queen was just beginning.